Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest Service Department News webinar. I hope that rather stirring music has got you in the mood for this session, which is all about the apartment of the future. We're going to be talking about how the physical service department and apart hotel product might evolve over the next few years. My name's George Sell. I'm Editor-in-Chief at International Hospitality Media, and we are a publisher of online B2B websites for the hospitality and real estate industries, and we are also events and award organisers. Now, this Service Department News webinar series is sponsored by IMS, Integrated Media Solutions. You can see their contact details on the screen and also in the chat, and we are just going to watch a short video to find out some more about IMS. Okay, thanks to IMS for sponsoring. And as I mentioned, if you'd like to get in contact with them to find out some more, you can see the contact details there in the chat. So today's webinar is going to last an hour. We're going to have around about 45 minutes of panel discussion, followed by some Q&A at the end. So if you have got any questions, please do submit them using either the chat or the Q&A function in Zoom. Everybody who's registered for the session will receive a link to a recording of it via email in the next couple of days. So I just wanted to show this slide of some screen grabs from Service Department news stories we've run recently, just to show some of the things we're going to touch on in the session. The zero carbon and the sustainability agenda is obviously a big thing for the future, and we're seeing brands unveiling new prototype room types, apartment types, and also acquiring other assets for conversion into service departments. So we've got a fantastic panel for the session today, and I'm going to ask them all to introduce themselves in turn, and we'll go from left to right as we look at the slide. So Alex, over to you first. Good afternoon and welcome.
Good afternoon, I'm Alex van Pelt. I work for Adagio Aparthotels and look after development for the UK and Ireland and recently Nordics, and growing our two brands, Adagio mid-scale 4-star and Access economy 3-star across those markets, focusing on lease management and franchise contracts. Thanks,
Alex. Paul R, over to you. I've done this again. I've got two people with the same name on a webinar. This seems to happen to me quite often. But Paul Rands, welcome to you.
Thank you, George, and good afternoon, everyone. Paul Rands from PKF Hospitality Group. PKF is a consulting business, long-standing in the hotel and tourism space, and more recently into the service living arena. I lead our think tank, which is the Future of Hospitality Institute, and the aim of the think tank is to look into innovation and trends across the hospitality sector. We planning to do this in collaboration with industry partners, and we've just started our first research project, which is called Future Living.
Thanks, Paul. Simon, good afternoon to you.
Hi, George. George, firstly, thanks very much indeed for inviting me to join the call with my fellow eminent panelists this afternoon. I'm Simon Catterick. I'm the founder and CEO of Mission Net Zero. Prior to setting up Mission last year, I was the CEO of a company called Kudos Communications, which was a leading independent IT managed services provider to the hospitality sector. Having exited that business and setting up Mission, our role really is recognizing that there's a race from multiple stakeholders to adopt the ESG agenda, is to help them to develop a credible, consistent net zero roadmap, whilst at the same time demonstrating with ESG commitments through the award of a prestigious international eco-label.
Thank you, Simon. And finally, Paul Wells, good afternoon to you.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Wells. I'm a partner at Dexter Moren Associates. We're a firm of architects and interior designers, 30 years old this year as it happens. We specialise in hospitality-led projects ranging from anything from hotels through to retirement living, co-living, service apartments. So it'll be interesting to see how this conversation goes today.
Thanks, Paul. I want to stay with you for a moment, Paul, for the first question and just ask whether you think in the future units are going to get smaller than they currently are. What do you think is the general direction of travel?
It did feel that we were going smaller for quite some time. I think that there was a drive for larger front of house spaces, shared accommodation, whether that was a cafe or a restaurant or co-working space. It feels a little bit like we might be leveling off, if not getting a little larger again. I don't know whether that's a result of the pandemic. Maybe there was a feeling that people are spending more time in their private spaces again. Certainly, it depends on location as well. So certainly central London, central urban areas are likely to be a little bit smaller. Maybe if you go a bit further out, that changes, they get a bit bigger. But we're certainly not competing with residential sizes still. We're probably talking range of maybe 22 to 25 in cities, up to maybe 30, 35 outside of that.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Paul. Alex, what's your take on that as an operator, and specifically in your role, somebody who's assessing developments regularly?
Yeah, so for our mid-scale 4-star Adagio brand, we have actually reduced our studio size by 1.5 square meters and our 1-bed size by 3 square meters. So we've spent a lot of work recently on a new apartment design for Adagio, and that's called the Smart House. And this is where the room types are slightly smaller than what we had before. You know, getting particularly on the new development side, getting them through is becoming harder because of increased construction costs and inflation, etc. So having the slightly smaller apartments helps on that side. For our economy 3-star brand access, it's really quite compact already. Studios are 19 square meters and the largest studio is 25 square meters. So we're not reducing them further, but on the other brand we have.
Mm-hmm. And is that to get more units onto a certain footprint, or is that because customers are demanding more in the way of communal spaces and they're happy with a smaller unit if they've got more space to socialize in?
Well, I think it's more on the development side, but consumers, because the reductions are, it's more important with the 1-bed, but they're not so noticeable. We've been clever with our design, and so there's no real impact for a consumer, but it just makes the viability a bit easier in terms of the development. Yeah, okay.
Finally, Paul, what's your take on this? You presumably get to see a fair few projects, and you during your time at Bridge Street, I think a couple of new brands were introduced, which included sort of smaller apart hotel style units. Do you think we're still going that way?
Yeah, well, I think the future probably is smaller, and for a lot of the reasons that have been described, around sort of market demands, from a development and construction perspective, cost of land, particularly. I think if you look at the evolution of serviced apartments, actually they've come from being an adaptation or an adaptation of a residential product into purpose-built brands. And I think as we've seen the purpose-built brands, we've seen the unit sizes reduce. And of course, when something gets changed or reduced and then becomes accepted, that then becomes the norm. And then, of course, you start to challenge the norm again, and again, that's where it can move smaller. I think just briefly, you mentioned Bridge Street. We did introduce brands, and we looked at micro apartments with our studio brand, and I think that was as much about trying to give choice to the consumer, based around price as well. So if you want to pay less, then actually you probably have to have a smaller space. And by giving those options, I think you can start to demonstrate value between the two.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Paul. Paul Wells, you and I were at an event yesterday where it was one of the topics that came up was the way that people are using apartments is different now. They're spending more time there, and even if they're traveling away for work, they might not necessarily be going to an office when they're away. They might still be working from an apartment, so they're there for more hours per day, and they're working and living often in the same space. So how are apartments reflecting that change in behaviour, and how can they be designed in a more flexible way to enable a kind of seamless way to work and live in the same space?
Yeah, well, I guess as I said earlier, my view was that apartment sizes are levelling off for that very reason, actually, that people are spending more time in them. And actually, you know, we've always provided workspaces, but there's been maybe a greater drive to have a larger workspace, whether that's now a shared desk with a dining room table, or whether that's still an individual works area. And obviously the other part that feeds into that is all the technology around working from your room. So having more reliable Wi-Fi, having a greater ability to plug multiple laptops and phones and the gubbins that you travel with now into charge, and have that a comfortable working chair, which is essential. You know, I think sitting on a dining chair for 8 hours is not really accepted anymore, because I guess people didn't used to do it either. Like you say, people used to use their apartments as a base to go to an office in another city, or even just to live there for a short time, but still go out to work. So to my mind, I think that you have to create a space that feels comfortable, and potentially is flexible as well in the way that it sets up. There's a lot of examples now of furniture that moves around. So maybe whether that's a bed that folds away, so you feel like you're out of your bedroom and perhaps working in a more of a living space, or whether it's even just an adaptable bed that becomes a couch. In fact, I was just looking today, even in cruise ships, Virgin Voyages now has this flexible bed which adjusts to be a corner sofa, which is quite interesting actually. So it's going into all these different sectors where people are spending a greater amount of time in their space, and how you feel like perhaps you don't want to be in a bedroom for that.
Yeah, the cruise ship analogy is interesting actually, because again, it's a relatively small space which you want to make as flexible as possible. So those guys are extremely good at designing for those. Alex, did you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, I mean, I think with our Access brand, which is economy positioned, it's smaller, and we do have that multifunctional furniture. You know what Paul, you were saying in terms of the bed that becomes a sofa, flips up, and I think in those tighter spaces, it's really important to have that multifunctional furniture. And we can look at some of those economy position brands, the compact micro brands that have been quite clever with all the design and use of space within, you know, 10, sometimes as small as 10 square meters. And I think we can learn from them, and also from yachts as well, because they're really clever with even smaller spaces at a premium kind of positioning as well.
Yeah, and Adagio, you've recently launched this co-living concept, which is another interesting twist on it. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, yeah, it's actually the room behind me. This is not my flat, but the idea behind co-living is we've created this new concept which sits alongside and within an Adagio, so from 4-star mid-scale brand, alongside the studios and the one beds. And the idea is a communal living space with bedrooms around it. So the bedrooms are 15 square meters, they're en suite. The sink is outside or within that room, outside of the bathroom. So it gives a bit more flexibility for if two guests are staying together. And then we have this communal space that contracts and expands in function of the number of bedrooms that surround it. So the communal space has a table, sofa area, a nice fully equipped kitchen with a washing machine, and large dishwasher, microwave oven, and well, a full oven actually. And the idea is to challenge that Airbnb market, so to accommodate groups, friends and families coming together, and co-workers. So the whole apartment is let, and what we want to do is just have open ourselves up to another segment of the market and attract groups into the properties. So we've got our first open at the Paris Bercy assets, but we're incorporating them in new developments, including Cambridge and Milan. And I think, you know, it's a great concept. It's being well received, and it's great for those areas of the floor plate, which is where I've seen it on projects I've worked on, where they're a bit more complicated. There might be a corner zone or something that won't fit the studios. It's not fully optimized, but with this apartment type, we can squeeze as much as we can in the space and give guests that optional extra of coming together as groups. And we've copied elements from our public areas, the circle, that's the public area concept we have. So for example, behind me is the library of objects. So we've got it's a communal living space. The bedrooms are lockable, so people can be fully private if they want to, in terms of it's fully secure. So if you're with co-workers, you still have that privacy. And that's important, I think, for the different guests coming through.
And it is early days of this concept, but are you seeing a new guest demographic coming to stay with you who maybe wouldn't have come to an Adagio before?
Yeah, I think at the moment we've got it open on the weekends. So in midweek, we're still having viewings and things like that for press, etc. But it's been really booked out over the in the coming months. And I think more so it's the pandemic as well that has really put a focus on our industry. So we've already got new guests coming because of that. And the co-living aspect is just an additional attraction, because there's nothing in the market in the apart hotel sector that offers that branded reliability that you get, and ability to stay with groups. Whereas, you know, Airbnbs, it's great, but you don't necessarily have that level of security and hygiene standards, and you're not sure what you're going to get. Whereas this is a branded, reliable assurance that you will get the same consistent product and service when you come.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Paul, I'll come to you first. I can see you've got your hand up. Did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, just picking up on something Alex said there with what Adagio are doing, and I think adaptability and flexibility are going to be very important as we look forward with apartments, and whether they're in service apartments or aparthotels or co-living or senior even. It's already happening. Clearly, Adagio are looking at how they can flex and move around with that space. I know Yays are looking at moving walls. There's a company in Austria called Kubo who have designed a modular apartment building where it has wooden modules that slot into a terminal. Now, you might say, well, that's nothing new. Modules have been happening, but these are really adaptable. So you can create much bigger spaces out of them by through their connection, but also you can remove them and replace them with something else if actually you want to try and change the use of the building a little bit. And they've even got the idea that potentially you own the module and you take it somewhere else when you want to move, which, if we want to think about the future, I guess we have to come out of current mindset. We might say, is that practical and does that work? But that could be a way that we're looking at things in the future.
Yeah, okay. I want to move on to the sustainability and ESG piece in a minute, but final question on the kind of architecture and construction side to you, Paul Wells. Is there anything coming down the line in terms of construction techniques or building materials that are going to revolutionise the way that service departments are built? I'm wondering if maybe pods are going to become more prevalent. If people are looking for consistency and uniformity, are these developments just going to be bolted together rather than built more traditionally?
Yeah, I mean, certainly modular construction is something we have been looking at. Pod bathrooms have been around for a long time, but maybe full modular construction is less prevalent. A lot of the problems with modular construction is that quite often, particularly urban sites, are not nice rectangular accessible sites, and bringing in lots of pods isn't always practical. However, we are looking at sites outside of London where modular construction is being considered as a possibility from the beginning. In terms of materiality, we're kind of torn at the minute as an architectural profession with the concerns over fire, and that is affecting probably materials more than sustainability at the moment. Unfortunately, we tend to be moving back towards the sort of heavier brick materials that are immediately fire resistant. However, within the interiors, then there's a lot more flexibility, and there are a lot of products coming back using either recycled plastics, which can be used for worktops and hard surfaces, and even there's quite a big shift towards the idea of reusing furniture. Now, obviously, a lot of the branded residencies have a standard across a number of rooms, which would be hard to reproduce through repositioning and reusing furniture. However, if you've got more of a boutique or eclectic brand, then actually it can be quite fun to see what furniture can be reused. And there's now firms that take furniture from old hotels, they'll repurpose them or at least recover them, with new reupholster them, and they can then be used. But like I say, you don't always get 200 of the same type or whatever you might need for a larger project. So that, I think there's a lot of flexibility in the way that interiors are coming forward, and actually within the brands as well. As Alex mentioned, you've got this sort of quite eclectic bookcase behind you of a collection of curiosities, and actually I'm sure that there'll be some consistencies, but there'll be a lot of differences as well with the sort of items that are sitting on those shelves, and all of this adds into how we can recycle and reuse products. And actually people love like old toys sitting on shelves, and so I think that ecology side and environmental side doesn't have to be just the big ticket items that obviously come in with construction anyway. It can be down to the nitty gritty of what you got sitting on your shelves, and having, if you have a 300 room development, you don't want 300 brand new vases. Maybe you go to the local flea market and have some local interest and reuse.
Are your developer clients, Paul, asking you about about a sustainable supply chain? So, for example, do the building products that have to have certain certifications and this kind of stuff? Who is the own? Who in the design and development process? Who is the onus on to make sure that all the materials used are part of a sustainable supply chain?
I mean, there's several accreditation sort of certification bodies out there, whether that's ranging from BREEAM, which I know there's a difference of opinion on after yesterday's conversation, or whether we're looking at LEED or other ones like that. And I think that the onus tends to be on the designer of the particular element. So certainly as architects, we look at where we're sourcing materials, making sure that timber comes from sustainable sources, etc. But then you've got to look at the whole life of a building and understand it's not just about what we put into the building or the M&E or the sustainability credentials on the energy usage, which obviously is being fed in by brand requirements, by occupant requirements, but it's also about how the building is used and operated. And as architects, we have less control on the operation. I think this is where, Simon, you probably have more of a relationship with the brands to help guide people on that. But obviously it comes down as well to how people use the buildings. And actually there was a very interesting conversation yesterday, as I'm sure you know, George, we were talking about whether occupants in the long run would pay for the energy they use. So whether there was a variation in the amount of ADR they paid based on whether they were going to be there during the day and need more energy, or whether they were much more of a transient evening only guest, and actually making them part of that process as well, so everybody feels they have a hand in it.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Simon, this is a good time to come to you and ask you how you think the ESG agenda is affecting the design and development process, and how that's likely to continue in the future.
Thanks, George. Yeah, I mean, we're seeing a real shift in the attitudes from many stakeholders into ESG. It's a real sort of top-down, bottom-up approach, with everybody having some position on it. Historically, I think certain stakeholders felt that ESG was really a sort of a tick box exercise. If they could say that they were planting trees, or they had a vegetarian menu, or that guests were encouraged not to reutilize their towels, that they were doing enough. But clearly that has changed, and I think we're seeing, as Paul mentioned, many new buildings having the likes of BREEAM applied as standard, and also on existing assets. And certainly when an investor is looking to dispose of a property, look closely at the ESG credentials. So BREEAM in use, as an example, is widely being adopted. And as Paul also suggested, the brands are adopting their own ESG and CSR platforms, as well as the independent labels, which many consumers are now familiar with, who want to make sure that they're staying with a sustainable brand, or indeed increasingly corporate meeting and events bookers require green credentials to be proved, and as such everybody's now taking it into consideration.
And who do you think is driving this agenda? Who's got their hand on the tiller? Is it the investment community? Is it governments? My hunch is in hospitality, it's not the consumer. I think there's probably a relatively small minority of people who would pay more to stay in a quote unquote sustainable property.
Yeah, I think after the 2 years that we've come out of, when the green agenda hasn't necessarily been very high on a priority list, you know, with hotels really looking to focus on revenue and guest satisfaction, it's got visibility across the whole spectrum. As I say, we're certainly seeing investors who are looking to dispose of assets being very conscious that they need to be able to show the green credentials of the hotel. Also, as you'll know, you mentioned the government, there's obviously legislation coming in that's going to make sure that everybody has to report on their emissions. And I think, you know, at the moment, there's lots of talk of greenwashing, as I mentioned examples earlier. But I think and you'll probably know that there's standard industry tools out there that enable a hotel or a part hotel to measure its carbon footprint, by setting you know, sort of standard set targets which are measurable and manageable. There's wide visibility on this from all sides.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Simon. Alex, did you want to comment on that topic?
Yeah, I think, I think it's the pressures coming from many different angles, and investors particularly, I'm negotiating various lease contracts, and I'm seeing green lease clauses in these that we're negotiating. I mean, we are prioritizing sustainability. We've amended our guidelines to incorporate a number of new things, including BREEAM, very good or above, rainwater collection, prioritizing materials of a natural origin. So we're seeing the pressure from the investors and funds who are funding our developments, and then from consumers as well. They're much more aware. They're making much more conscious decisions about how they use and a product, and how they spend their time and where they spend their time. And I think and that's coming from definitely from the younger generation up. Kids putting pressure on their parents as well, I think, to be more sustainable.
Thanks, Alex. Paul W, over to you.
So it was just one final point. The other element that's feeding in on this is actually planning. And now we're having to increasingly justify the demolition of a building because of the embodied carbon. And in some cases, there's a very fine line between viability of refurbishing a building and achieving the green credentials and the additional requirements on whether it's even just a wall type, and increasing insulation and retaining a building. And actually the longevity might be that actually you are better demolishing a building, even though it doesn't appear at first glance that that's the right option, because in the long run, it will be a greener and more sustainable building. But actually that justification of planning is something that maybe even a year ago was less talked about, because it feels every single time we speak to planners now, one of the first questions is, can you justify the removal of this building? Just as something that's outside of maybe everybody's immediate focus on this call, because obviously brand and occupants and drivers of the end user is very visible to all of us, but planning is perhaps less so.
Yeah, okay, that is an interesting point. Thank you, Paul. Simon, what role does technology play in apartments becoming more energy efficient and more sustainable, and how do you think that's likely to evolve in the future?
Well, I think certainly that technology plays an important role. We're seeing the adoption of, in existing properties, the retrofitting of energy and water saving measures as standard. So things like, and you might see I've got one going off all the time here, an occupancy sensor or daylight sensors, water saving measures such as flow restrictors and aerated showers, but also more fundamentally, I think, efficient heating, ventilation and air control systems, and certainly the rise of intelligent BMS platforms that puts the sort of real-time control of the systems into the hands of the hotel team. But also increasingly, I think, through the adoption of mobile apps, there's the ability to put technology into the hands of the guests. So there's the ability for them to be able to see what they're doing in relation to utilities, and they can then also measure their own carbon footprint, as well as certain brands giving them the ability to offset it. And also, I think the use of technology in rooms is incredibly important to help the guest understand the journey that the individual brand or building is on, whether that's through advertising initiatives through the guest TV channel, whether it's through increasingly use of tablets that enable them to communicate effectively with guests, or the apps themselves. It's an incredibly important part of communicating effectively to everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. On the subject of guest-facing technology, Paul R., what do you think the guest of today expects as standard in terms of in-room technology, and what will they be expecting, let's say, 3 years down the line from now?
The The great crystal ball question. Look, in very, very simple terms, great Wi-Fi. I think connectivity with the TV screen. I've stayed recently in service apartment products where still I couldn't connect my device to the screen, or it wasn't a smart TV. And I think, and that's a relatively recently opened building as well. So I think those at a very basic level are there. I think there's been talk, and it certainly started to happen in the hotel space around your ability to control everything through an app in the room, whether that be the lighting or the curtains or the temperature, etc. I think that's not for everyone, and maybe isn't a priority piece. But I think tech also falls before you arrive at the location, and whether that, your interaction with the property before you arrive, right from the point where you're booking to the arrival process. And I think one of the advantages of that certainly service living and particularly service apartments has had is remote access, and increasingly sophisticated ways of allowing people to turn up and access. Again, I've had experiences where I've turned up late after hours where there was a front desk, but that was closed, and then there's a terminal outside the building, and at 11 o'clock at night and it's dark and you're trying to fill in, and it's then asking you for all your passport details. So I think there are ways that that can get improved, and that whole process can be much slicker for the guest experience. And the technology, I think, is ever moving and increasingly there for that to happen.
Do you think this seamless, no contact customer journey from booking to check out in apartments is here to stay now? Do you think the level of interaction with the property's staff is going to stay as minimal as it has been as a result of the pandemic?
Well, I think where it's probably helping right now is around staff shortages in the hospitality sector. And so those that have got this ability are able to perhaps absorb or mitigate some of that. I think it will continue. Again, I think it's about acceptance, and I think the longer we have certain processes or things in place, people get used to them and accept them. I think there's always the room for human interaction within hospitality, and service apartments certainly falls into that. I know our experiences, from my time at Bridge Street, where we had a real range in length of stay from one night through to 1 year. And if somebody's staying for a year, they probably largely want to be left alone. They probably don't want too much interaction. I think they might want it from time to time. I think if you're there treating it more like a hotel stay, then maybe your expectations are slightly different. And again, that's probably where you need to have some flexibility or adaptability within your building and your operation.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Alex, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think, look, we're in the extended stay apart hotel business, and so guests are coming for short, medium, and long stays, and some of them will want a seamless kind of check-in process where it's all digitalized, but some actually want that human interaction and want that face. And the longer staying guests, actually, I think because it's a home from home, they are much more they're happier to be in the ground floor areas with a community, with the people that they know, that our staff know so much about the longer stay guests, for their families, their friends, their pets, whatever. And so I think it's offering that flexibility for the guests, knowing that some will want it, some won't, but knowing that as an apart hotel business, the check-in and check-outs are less frequent anyway. So it's not like a hotel, we're different to that. But we want to keep the ground floors activated and busy and feeling like you can be at home and you can dip in and dip out in terms of what you want. But I don't think computers and tech is a substitute for that personal interaction. Really.
No, and where do you stand at Adagio on the in-room tech piece. I mean, Paul mentioned that it's possible to control absolutely everything from a tablet.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
always been a bugbear of mine. I mean, why on earth you can't just get up and pull the curtains? Why it needs to be electric, especially in these days of, you know, heightened ESG emphasis. I don't really understand. But what's your thinking?
So we actually, it's funny you mentioned that, because when we redesigned our Adagio rooms recently, we had an in-house tech enabled system which you could speak to, and it didn't exactly work out so well, and we removed it from the final room at the end, because it wasn't as slick as it could be. And I think things need to improve, and we just realized that actually there's some things that you can have focus on tech on, but actually others it can't be, you know, it can't replace a human. So we've explored that, and we've amended as a result. Is
voice activated tech something you think you will revisit when the technology has moved on a bit more?
Maybe, yeah.
Okay. Simon, did you want to come in there?
Yes, thanks, George. Yes, it's interesting, because I think lots of people, if you were to ask 3 different people what ESG meant to them, you'd probably get 4 or 5 different answers. But generally speaking, I think lots of people consider it to be sort of centered around purely sort of energy, water and waste. And yet it's so much more than that. And I think tech plays a part, certainly, in really effectively communicating with guests some of those other areas. So, for instance, if someone, as Paul just mentioned, is staying somewhere for a year, they're probably wanting to get to know the local neighbourhood. So tech plays a part in helping promote the local community. So whether that's authentic, historical, cultural activities, whether or not it's promoting walking and jogging maps or public transport, through to being able to hire a bike or book yoga sessions or gym sessions. So I think more and more people we're seeing are looking to how they can create this all-encompassing ESG sort of portfolio of activities, and tech plays an important part in being able to communicate that effectively.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Paul W.
Just a couple of points. Firstly, it was just a conversation about voice-activated technology, and I think I'm reminded of that sketch of the 2 Scottish men trying to control the lift, and it's just not working. I'm sure we've all seen it, and I think that that's obviously something which has to be considered within the hospitality sectors, that not everyone has a clear English accent or German accent or whatever country your tech's in, but that's by the by. The other one is more just, I think technology obviously is very critical actually to the way buildings are managed and operated, in terms of the way that the M&E that's put into these buildings often has a lot of technology that has to be in part of that to make them run efficiently. And actually I think as well, the way that rooms are occupied, there's now technology that, you know, senses whether the room is occupied and whether the settings on the heating should be taken down to standard levels or the electricity should be switched off. And that technology I think is fantastic. And I think it does have some way to go in some areas. But certainly it has to be considered now, or a lot of the M&E technology that we're trying to introduce into these buildings to make them more sustainable just doesn't work. And actually that building management systems are critical to that as well.
Yeah. Simon, you wanted to add something there?
Just leading on from that, just to say for, you know, any investor listening in, of course, is that so many of these applications can be retrospectively fitted inexpensively. So to put lighting controls into bedroom corridors and into public areas or back of house areas is a really inexpensive option with a clearly demonstrable ROI. And similarly, the ability to restrict water without affecting the guest experience. Again, those kinds of things can be applied simply quickly and very cost effectively. So there is a way in which they can help themselves to reduce their carbon footprint, and also at the same time make associated cost savings.
Yeah. In a conversation I had yesterday, somebody mentioned to me that he thinks it's not too far in the future that the utility companies will start dynamically pricing for electricity the way that airlines or hotels do, which makes this kind of thing all the more important. Paul R., did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I'm just on this general sort of ESG point and cost. What I'm hearing, and it seems to be the case, is that there is still a disconnect there between potential owner, investor, developer, and occupier, and who pays for it. Because I think from the occupier or operator's perspective, if you're looking at a occupier of a whole building, they're being asked to pay more rent to justify the additional cost that is coming in. The success story I think that we all hear a lot about is Room 2 in Lamington. That's where you've got occupier and developer are the same entity and can see the value of the longer term savings that potentially come from it. But I think you touched on it earlier, George, about are the consumers driving this within hospitality? And I think you're probably right now. I think it's always still around price, but it will come for sure. But until it does, and you can generate more revenue for having these credentials and people coming to you, I think operators are then going to struggle to justify paying higher occupational costs to have those buildings. So until we find a solution on that, I think there's possibly some stalling still that's going to hold this progress back, unfortunately. Yeah,
Paul, I want to stay with you for a second, and part of your job in your new role is kind of monitoring the broader living sector, service living sector. So I was wondering if you think there is anything that service departments and apart hotels can learn in terms of future construction, design and operations, if there's anything that they can learn from other asset classes. We've touched on the fact that Adagio has got a new prototype that borrows from co-living, but what about things like build to rent, later living, some of these other sectors?
Yeah, well, I mean, you could argue that build to rent, as we're seeing it certainly here in the UK, maybe has learned from service departments, because that's become much more service thinking in its mindset around residential. I'm probably going to contradict myself from earlier in saying that we can be all remote and not have people interaction. I think what we've seen with co-living in the early iterations of it and this sort of larger communal space, and I think there's a great phrase. I can't claim it, but it's you can't afford it if you don't share it. And so I think the increase in communal space, or rather the expectation of the consumer to see more in a building, is going to be important, and I think probably we can learn from that. The challenge then, of course, is how you justify that taking that extra space and how you rentalize that, or how you generate income from that space. So and that's probably where we come back to tech and wider community and having local community come and use the space as well, so that you have a very active space. But I think certainly around community and communal space, I think that you can improve the service offering for service departments and apart hotels from that.
And Paul Wells, on the design and architecture side, is there anything that you're seeing in other asset classes that you think could be adopted in the service department and apart hotel space?
Yeah, so it's actually really interesting what Alex was saying about the co-living element feeding into the sort of service department world, because we're doing a number of schemes now for co-living as well. And actually it's an interesting sector, because when you look at the front of house spaces or the shared communal spaces, the management of them becomes a lot more difficult with shared kitchens and facilities like that. So if you're sharing them between 2 or 3 bedrooms, people take responsibility. But when you're talking about larger schemes with 300 or 400 bedrooms sharing communal spaces, then actually, if anything, there's more pressure on human interaction to keep these places operating and usable as much as anything. So I think it's interesting that the way that we're evolving in our sort of the way we live in the residential sectors, that now co-living has its own guidance document through the GLA, dictating size of apartments, dictating the number of shared facilities. And this is something which we've never had in hospitality. When we talk about service apartments, there's always the question, do you put a washing machine in, or do you have a laundry room somewhere, and then how many apartments can share that one machine? And the GLA's actually started to introduce that for co-living, and actually there probably is some learning, joint learning on both sides of what the GLA thinks appropriate. Maybe we can learn from service apartments about how much they're actually used. So yeah, it's interesting how they're all merging, and I think, like we've said this on several webinars now and conversations, that hospitality is feeding into every single element of residential living, whether that's build to rent or retirement living or senior living or active, what do they call it? Active living. We've heard lots of different terms for this Asia group, but yeah, no, I think there's a lot of overlap and there's a lot of lessons that need to be considered.
And are you seeing an increase in potential schemes which contain these various elements in the same development, and more mixed use projects?
So the co-living schemes we're looking at tend to be purely co-living, but in some cases they're sites that had hotel consent. In the current climate, the developers feel it's more appropriate to develop them as something else. But certainly the crossover between hotel and service department has been around for a long time, and if anything, that's becoming more prevalent as people see that there's an advantage to having diversification of the type of accommodation you offer on a site. And actually, if anything, we've learned from the pandemic that self-contained spaces have survived better than the hotel end. So yeah, no, we're seeing certainly more hotels merging and then using the front of house spaces that the hotels offer as standard as your service apartment provision. Yeah,
okay, thanks, Paul. We've had a couple of questions in from Jeremy Badil. Thanks, Jeremy, for your questions. Alex, I've got a feeling these were aimed at you, because I think you were talking at the time that these came in.
Right, okay.
So the first one is, does more comfort mean increasing investments on FF&E?
Look, I don't think so, because you can get comfort at different price points across the market. So you don't necessarily have to pay more in the FF&E to be more at home and enjoying the space. So I think at every different pricing position, you can have comfort for sure.
Mm-hmm. Paul, I saw you.
What's increasing FF&E costs is inflation,
yeah.
and that's the main issue. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to agree with what Alex just said. I don't think it affects comfort and cost necessarily, but what's critical is durability. And actually that's one of the issues that we have with new products that are coming onto the market that proclaim to be more sustainable. They're not necessarily got the tried and tested durability factor that a lot of hotels and shared accommodation require. So potentially we could be putting in more sustainable products, but actually changing them more frequently. And I think that will obviously emerge over time. We'll get to a better position, but right now, sometimes it's maybe a little untested.
Well, that actually ties in with the second part of Jeremy's question, which is, how does the clever furniture tie in with the concentration on sustainability? Paul, I think you were talking about the flexible.
Well, I think sustainability is obviously more in the product, but equally I guess you could claim that the more versatile a product is, whether that's a table or a chair or a bed that changes, the more sustainable that is, because you've got less furniture in your room. But I think it's more about how we use a space than sustainability, the versatility in the furniture.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Paul R, did you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was just a general point or question rather about comfort, and do we need to think more about comfort and usability for a setting where people are staying for longer than if they're just staying for one night, or are they equally important?
Interesting point. Does anyone want to pick up on that? Alex, as an operator, what's your perspective?
Look, I think, well, our new apartments have got much more of a residential look and feel, which is what we're seeing where the market's going at the moment. And I think for comfort, you want a comfortable sofa, you want a comfortable bed, and particularly the desk. I think the desk can often be overlooked as a tiny little space in the corner with like a little shelf and uncomfortable chair. So with the trend of leisure and business and merging, and people extending trips for a longer period, I think it's really critical to actually really think about the FF&E and that, particularly the desk, because people are going there to work, to live, to eat, stay, and they want the same comfort that they would have at home, if not better. So it's super important. Yeah, thanks, Alex. That's a great note to end it on, because at the end of the day, the physical product is ultimately dictated by the behaviours of the people who are going to pay to use it, and that is definitely changing. Thanks, guys. I think that was a really interesting discussion. We've come to the end of our hour. I'm just going to show a couple of quick slides before we sign off, and we're also going to keep the session open for a couple of minutes at the end, so people can take any notes from the chat, because there's quite a lot of information in there. So the next Service Department News webinar is on June the 23rd, and it's called Blurred Lines, How an Operator's Role is Evolving. And I think, again, we're going to be looking at the kind of expansion in length of stay, how the same buildings are accommodating anything from one night to a year, as we've touched on today. That's on June the 23rd, and you can register for that either in the chat or using the QR code on the screen there. So our next big event here at International Hospitality Media is the Urban Living Festival, which is taking place at the East Winter Garden at Canary Wharf on July the 6th and 7th. And that is concentrating, again, on a topic that came up today, and that's the convergence and the blurring of the lines between various hospitality and real estate asset classes. It's going to be a great event, and we'd like to see loads of you there. So there's more information there, and also a link on the screen. Here are some of our first tranche of confirmed speakers for ULF, including a familiar face top right there.
Not me again. Oh.
If you're interested in sponsoring any of our webinars or our events, please do get in touch with my colleague Katie, whose details are on the screen and also in the chat. Give us a follow on some of the social channels on there if you're active. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks to Alex, to Simon, to Paul and Paul for their great contributions today. As I say, the session will stay open for a couple of minutes. I hope you all enjoyed it, and have a good rest of your Thursdays. Thanks everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, George.
Thank you. Bye.